Hi, this is Stephen Andrews, outlaw bookseller, science fiction critic, science fiction writer, psychogeographer, all-round good guy. And here we are. Today we're going to talk about the Strugatsky Brothers, Hard to Be a God, Roadside Picnic, and their wider oeuvre. Well, you've read Roadside Picnic. Maybe you haven't. If you haven't, perhaps you should. I'm going to incorporate an episode of 100 must-read science fiction novels in this video and talk a bit about Roadside Picnic for those of you who haven't read it. And I'm going to discuss what else you can read by the Strugatsky Brothers, because now is a good time, because there's more available now, I think, in English in the UK than there ever has been. Why is there a Moomin in this shot? Well, Moomins are European too. It sort of draws us to outdoor places, semi-industrial ruins, abandoned places. This, of course, is the Criterion Blu-ray edition of Stalker, which is the best one you can get. And the film was made in 1979. The Strugatsky Brothers wrote, I think, 12 different screenplays for Tarkovsky, and he chose the one he wanted to film. So if you haven't seen it, do, because it's fantastic. It's very long, it's very beautiful and meditative. You could say it's pretentious. Does it pretend? It doesn't pretend. I think it achieves. Liminal spaces, edgelands, running water, all these things indicators of Tarkovsky. But are they really in the Strugatsky's work? Arkady Strugatsky, 1925 to 1991. Boris Strugatsky, born 1931, Russia. I think Boris is dead now. I need to put the details in a subtitle, so my apologies for not knowing the exact date off the top of my head. Anyway, Roadside Picnic, 1972. And what you're seeing here is my original Penguin A format, which I've had for many, many years. The visitors come unannounced, stay only for a short while, and leave without fanfare. Their passage is marked in 6 places. These areas are shunned, lethal to mankind, and sealed off by the authorities. They are known simply as the zones. "30 years later, when scientific establishments have been built adjacent to each zone, the mysteries of the visitors remain. Many people have expired in the zones while attempting to recover the technological detritus the visitors left behind, killed by unearthly gravitational effects, deadly magnetic traps, and other indefinable menaces which defy scientific knowledge. Despite all efforts to prevent civilians from entering the zones, a tradition of exploration, discovery, and retrieval has developed. The men known only as Stalkers brave the zones in their search for alien artifacts to sell on the black market, growing wise in their understanding of these visited areas, navigating them with respect and grace. Redrick Schuhart is a roguish stalker who defies the bullets of the border guards time and time again to negotiate the wonders and snares of the zone in Harmont, Canada, to loot the most valuable booty of all times, something that will confer man's deepest wish upon him, no matter what it may be. The Strugatsky Brothers were the most acclaimed speculative writers in Russia, typifying the traditions of European SF, being exponents of the literary experimentalism and spiky characterization of their precursors. Benefiting from a positive critical reception in the West from the mid-70s onwards, when their works first appeared in translation, they are best known by association with the cinema adaptation of Roadside Picnic, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, who also filmed the original version of Lem's Solaris. Roadside Picnic is an entrancing amalgam of lively sense of wonder genre elements and the witty absurdist heaviness of the very best continental literature that both fans of classic SF and European modernism will enjoy. I met the Strugatskys at the Worldcon in Brighton in 1987. This is Frontier Crossing, the book which everybody who attended got a copy of. Everybody paid a membership and what have you. And this was my first exposure to the Strugatskys. I'd come across Roadside Picnic. I don't think I'd read it at that point. And they were quite sort of fashionable in the 70s. Lots of their stuff was translated into English for the first time. But I actually went up and talked to them. I spotted them because they were quite distinctive, and I'll show you their pictures in this book. They're the guys there looking very Russian, as you can see, and of course the Cold War was still raging then, so I knew what they looked like from the pictures in the book. And I was in the dealer's room at one point, and I spent a lot of time in the dealer's room, which was just fantastic. Best book buying experience I ever had, and I was buying lots of books. And they were there, so I just went up and I said hello, and I hadn't read the work, and I said something facile like, hi, hope you're enjoying the con, you know, great to see you here in the West. And they're very gracious and very pleasant. And that was it, really. And it was it was interesting because, of course, you thought, wow, this really is a world con. This is a really big thing. And recently I was reading the anthology The Best of World SF, edited by Lavi Tirtal, which I'm going to review in a week or two's time. And I'm still reading it. I'm reading it at work in my lunch breaks. And he goes on about how World SF really used to mean, you know, you get a few people over from the Soviet bloc, you know, and okay, so the world's a different place then, you know, but it was a big thing. So yeah, so that's how I first met them. And, you know, you can dine out on that. I always mention it when I sell their books, because of course it gives a little bit of history to things. And in here, there was some little essay about them and a great picture, which was based on their book Prisoners of Power, aka The Inhabited Island. And it's this piece of artwork here on the left of the screen, and that's Ian Miller, of course, who the good doctor mentioned when he did an interview with me. So that gives you an idea of Prisoners of Power. As you see, there's a tower emanating some sort of energies and people screaming beneath, and that is actually a scene from the book, an important one. That's Heliconia there on the other side. And, you know, so that was my sort of first exposure to them, and then I read Roadside Picnic and really enjoyed it, saw Stalker. You know, for a long time after that, it was really hard to get their work. You never really saw it very much at all. The last few years has seen a flood of reissues, new translations, books appearing for the first time, which is great. So I went through a long period of sort of really, you know, savouring the Strugatskys and, you know, keeping their books until I was in the mood. And now there's loads to choose from. There's at least, I think, 10 in print. So I'm going to go through some of them with you and talk a bit about them. I would say my favourite Strugatsky book, as much as I like Roadside Picnic, and it's a lot wittier and lighter and more accessible in lots of ways than Stalker is, the film. So I guess it would be Hard to Be a God. This is the UK first edition of Hard to Be a God, and from Methuen, and I think this this may be the world first translated version. Let me just check. Came out, published in 1975. No, Seabury Press did it in the States in 73. It's got a rather beautiful jacket, which is reminiscent of Bosch there. And in some ways it does look more like a fantasy novel, but as you see, these blue things are helicopters, and rather nice. And of course it's out in Gollancz Masterworks, which looks like this. I usually recommend Hard to Be a God because it's my favourite Strugatsky so far. And I also think it's accessible, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you're reading something in translation and you're not used to reading literature in translation, it's a good thing. I've read lots of Russian novels, people like Dostoevsky, Saltykov, Shchedrin, Gogol. So Russian literature is something I'm familiar with. Even the modern stuff like Ajayev's novel with cocaine, and I think I mentioned Andreyev, who's an important sort of linking figure, sort of decadent, surrealist type writer. When I talk about Hard to Be a God, I usually say it's like a cross between The Left Hand of Darkness and Game of Thrones. And it does remind me of Left Hand of Darkness. It was actually published before. I think it was published in 1964, which is a few years before Left Hand of Darkness. Just to talk briefly about the plot of Hard to Be a God. It's set on a planet where there are people, just like us, very similar to us. And this is something that the Strugatskys do in numerous of their books. They have a galaxy or a universe which is seeded with humanoid life forms, rather like the Hainish novels of Lagan. And in Hard to Be a God, there are 250 historians from Earth, and they are resident on the planet. They're in disguise. They're disguised as natives. They have submarines, helicopters. They have a base near the North Pole of the planet. And they're there undercover. And the key character is a guy called Anton. His identity in the book is Don Rumata, and the word Don is used in Hard to Be a God rather than the way it's used in Italy. You know, it sort of means like an important figure in the community. And so he's almost like he's like a nobleman. And Don Rumata, Anton, wears a circlet on his head. And in that circlet, there's what resembles a jewel. And it's a two-way camera, it's a video camera. So back at the station and back on Earth, people can see what he's researching, what he's encountering, what have you. And it's also a way of staying in touch with his compatriots as well. Part of the problem with the planet that they're on is that it seems to be stuck in its medieval period, and there are repressive forces there who are in power, who are determined to destroy any sign of a renaissance. Anybody who reads or writes or tries to invent anything, you know, there's a real sort of fear of knowledge and of progress and advancement, obviously because of power. And you could see this as an allegory for, you know, progress in the Soviet Union. Obviously, when the Strugatskys were there, they had to be careful what they wrote. Anybody who wrote speculative fiction had to be. Strangely enough, you know, in some ways you could get away with some things. There was a similar situation in the 1950s, McCarthy at America, where, you know, as various people have pointed out, the likes of Paul Kornbluth, Dick Sheckley, you know, they could actually have a go at McCarthyism in the pages of magazines like Galaxy and Fantasy and Science Fiction, and nobody, you know, cared, because they just thought SF was for kids. Because of course, you know, they hadn't been science fiction for very long in the way that we think of it. Magazine science fiction was still a relatively new thing. It had only been called science fiction for a few years. There had only been books with the term science fiction on the cover for a few years then. So, you know, it's always been a great vehicle for subversive political commentary. So some people see Hard to Be a God that way. The main narrative, Don Rumata, Anton, is involved in some local sort of daring-do and politics and what have you. And he's really not happy about the policy of non-involvement. And this is rather where it's like Left Hand of Darkness, because of course, if you've read Left Hand of Darkness, or if you haven't, you should, because it's fantastic. We have an envoy from Earth, except in Left Hand of Darkness, it's all above board. Generally, I is out as an Earthman, and of course, on the planet Left Hand of Darkness, there's this interesting gender thing. So, you know, straight away, somebody who is human from Earth is noticeable. It's different, obviously, in Hard to Be a God, because, as I say, they're undercover. And Don Rumata is involved with various sort of political things going on, and he's not very happy about the non-involvement. And he's not the only one. There have been other people before him who have tried to sort of get things going, to start insurrections, what have you, and they end up being sort of killed by the local sort of oppressive types, or they end up being pulled out and rescued by the compatriots in helicopters and what have you. So, you know, there are some legends building up about this little use of technology, and there's an interesting opening scene where Don Rumata uses a synthesizer, a box, which basically, there's one part where he puts wood shavings in, you know, sort of sawdust, and he presses a few buttons and some local coins drop out the bottom, you know. So obviously it's advanced tech, similar to magic, as Arthur C. Clarke would say. So that's how it starts. I'm not going to talk about the plot too much, but straight away you get lots of descriptions of the sort of horrific things that are going on, bodies decaying, there's a lot of disease, it's very, very unhealthy, people are killed for sort of inventing things and what have you. So it's a pre-Renaissance thing. So it is rather reminiscent of the way that when science was starting to emerge from underneath Catholicism in Europe, it had to sort of really watch it, because people would be done for heresy and would end up, you know, in terrible situations. So it is rather like that. So it's all in the title. It's Hard to Be a God, and it's about what happens and the actions that the different historians take. So I'm not going to tell you too much about that. Now, of course, there are 2 film versions. Yes, 2 film versions. That's the version you're most likely to have seen, the one by Alexis Germain, which he filmed over many years. And it's clear labour of love. It's black and white. It's 177 minutes long. It's really, really impressive visually. It's just amazing. It's inventive. It's disgusting because it's all full of mud and strange people. It's rather like the sort of thing the Herzog would do. And At the same time, as much as it's impressive, it's actually, in my view, a failure. I don't think it infodumps enough, quite frankly. It does a tiny bit at the beginning, and unless you read the book, you wouldn't really know entirely what was going on. That's my view very much. So to me, it's an incomplete work of art. You know, if you read the blurb on the back, if you read a review, you're okay, but you should be able to just sit down and watch a film with no knowledge of it and be able to get all the nuance and all the plot, and I think that's missing from it. But it is impressive, it's worth seeing, and it does divide people. They either love it or hate it. I think it's, in terms of its craft, you've got to admire it, but as a feature film, I think it's a complete failure, I'll be totally honest. And I do think it's overly influenced by Tarkovsky and this whole idea that when you make an East European SF film, that it has to be, you know, this huge art project. And that's the thing, everything's divided in SF cinema. It's one thing or the other. And Hard to Be a God is such a great book. It's such a wise book, a humane book. It's an exciting book. You relate to the characters. The level of detail is fantastic, but it still rollicks along when you're reading it. That, you know, you need a happy medium in an adaptation. Funnily enough, the other film, which is much, much, much earlier, because the German one came out in 2013, is this one here. And this is a DVD, and I got this on eBay. And for a while, you could actually stream it on Amazon. I think you still can, but it's not very good quality. And this isn't fantastic quality either. And this was a German-Russian co-production from about 1987. And as you see, it looks a tad cheesy. And, you know, this is the problem. This is actually a lot more faithful. It's called Hard to Be a God. You don't have to sort of be able to read in Cyrillic and Russian, subtitled. And it's a very interesting one. It has Werner Herzog does a cameo in it, funnily enough. And there are moments which are absurd, where it looks like an 80s Star Trek Next Generation episode. There's other moments where it's serious, but this is a better representation of the novel. There are some differences at the end, but I think it's far more faithful. And I think in terms of a narrative, in terms of getting over the story, it's far, far better. Of course, the ideal version of Hard to Be a God would be somewhere in between the Alexei German one and this one. But track this down if you can. It's great fun. I'm looking forward to watching it again soon, actually, because I watched it twice. I need to watch it again. So if you enjoy Hard to Be a God, read the book first, because the book is the best, of course, and then track down both versions and watch them. It's an interesting exercise. So that's Hard to Be a God. So do pick it up. So if you've read Roadside Picnic, or even if you haven't, you might want to start with Hard to Be a God first, because I think it's a fantastic book. And as I say, it's also an interesting exercise to read it alongside The Left Hand of Darkness. So if you're new to both books, read them back to back and see what comes out of it. You'll find it really interesting. As I say, there are lots of other things out there now by the Strugatsky Brothers to read. Recently, Penguin started their A-format Penguin Classics SF series. That was a couple of years ago. Everything's distorted because of the pandemic, I find. I don't know about you. And this is 1 Billion Years to the End of the World. I've not read this yet. It's very short. I've been saving it up, but I've realised that I don't have to save them up anymore because they're coming quite thick and fast. So I'm looking forward to reading that, and that's a fantastic little book. Great stuff. I know the Occupier, who does the music on my channel, has read this, and he enjoyed it. So there's that one to look out for. Something you will find much harder to find. It's out there, but it's usually very expensive. It changes hands for usually at least about £60. I've had this for many years. This is the Dobson edition of The Final Circle of Paradise. Nobody seems to have picked up on the fact that this has been translated yet. This dates back to, I think this is late 70s. And this is a great one. And if you see it, snap it up in any condition. Some people are charging, I say, huge amounts in AB for this. That's one to watch out for. So hopefully that'll get reissued soon. But that's a little Strugatsky collectible there. I did have, at one point, I did have a hardcover of Snail on the Slope, a Gollancz one, which was mint. And I sold that on because I'm not really a massive fan of Snail on the Slope, if I'm honest. It has two narratives intertwined, plot and counterplot. And it's recently sort of reissued in Gollancz Masterworks, as you see, so you can make your own mind up. I reread it, and I'm still not entirely convinced that it is one of their more fabulous works, and it is utterly bizarre. And I think if you sort of pick it up and, you know, want sort of a straightforward narrative, the sort of thing that you can pull out of Hard to Be a God, or Roadside Picnic. Not so much with this. This is older, so it does divide people. This was a bit of a struggle, I find. People who like the sort of things like Bulgakov and the more chewy, naughty, modernist things will enjoy this more, but it's out there for you to enjoy. I do wish I'd kept that hardcover though, because it's quite uncommon, but there you go, you live and learn. I probably needed the money at the time. You can also now get the monumental The Doomed City by the brothers. This was never published at the time in Russia. It's sort of circulated in samizdat, that sort of thing. There's extensive material in here by them about the writing of the book and why it was suppressed and what have you, and that's fascinating in itself. I'm not going to tell you about that. It is about, as it says on the back, a mysterious city with artificial sun, bordered by an abyss on one side and possibly high wall on the other. I wonder if that refers to a certain Soviet Union. Who knows? Its inhabitants have been plucked from different periods of 20th century history and left to govern themselves, advised by the inscrutable mentors. This is the experiment seen through the eyes of Andrei Voronin, a young astronomer from 1950s Leningrad, whose rise to the political hierarchy has a devastating effect. So there you go. You're going to get all sorts of resonances there with the Soviet Union and communism, what have you. And it's a big chunky one. I'd say the additional material in this is fantastic, so check it out. One of my favourite Strugatskys is this book, which I know as Prisoners of Power, and has been reissued recently in a new translation as The Inhabited Island. Let me just show you my hardcover original. Because I shelve my books by format, you know, you never have one author's work all together, they're all over the place, so I knew I'd forget something. So that's the Gollancz hardcover of Prisoners of Power, as I say, now retranslated as The Inhabited Island, and there's a slight spine tearing. I've had this, gosh, a very, very long time, and this I think was the first one I read after Roadside Picnic, and this is a really great one. I really love this book. This was part of a 4-book series, and the others I don't have them. I think one of them has been translated. I'll try and pop everything up on the screen because I do these things off the cuff. You know, I don't do any research beforehand. It's all up there. The Outlaw Bookseller just reels it off as he does in work. So get hold of that. As I say now, you can get hold of it as The Inhabited Island. Now, I read this recently. I haven't done a close textual comparison as I did with Lies Inc. in the Philip K. Dick video a few weeks ago. But I did have a look at it, and basically what seems to have changed is some of the names. They've changed some of the names because they had to be careful about that. And this is really great. And I describe this when I sell this in my job as 1984 meets Flash Gordon, and that's pretty much it. It's about a guy called Maxim Kamara. Maxim is a sort of like a sort of Superman, really. He's a man of the future. He comes from a ideal socialist state in the future where everything's fantastic, a disease has been cured, everybody's got lots of wealth and what have you. And this is fairly decadent, actually, really sort of kicking back, what have you. And Maxim's young, you know, he's got a fantastic, magnificent body. He's bored, so he signs up for the space service and he goes off in a spaceship and zooms around the universe looking for fun and games and what he can find. And he crashes onto this uncharted planet, and it's a first contact book, and rather like Roadside Picnic, you know, rather like How to Be a God in a way as well. And he sort of finds that they are humanoids. I think the people have only 4 toes and 4 fingers. They're slightly different, so he does stand out a bit. And he discovers that there's this sort of nightmare dystopian society. It works on a couple of levels. Just when you think what you know the dystopia is, a second level comes in. There's the government and there are mutants, and the mutants are looked down on, and there are these huge towers which project these waves which gives the mutants pain, and that's what the picture in the Jim Burns and the Jim Burns picture in the Worldcon book is about. And it's funny because I say Maxim is rather like a Flash Gordon character, really, and he ends up in the army and he tries to sort of help the people there. And it's a big chunky tome, and it's really, really good. But I say, when you think you know what the full nature of the dystopian society is, the other levels and other complexities come in. So it's really, really good. Now, there is a film of Prisoners of Power, aka The Inhabited Island. Dark Planet, this is it. There's also a version called The Inhabited Island. Dark Planet is like an edited version. It's really complicated history. I haven't gone into it in depth for this video. You're best to have a look on, I think there's a good entry on Wikipedia about this, other sources as well. There's different versions out there. And to see the complete thing, unless it's been revised recently, you have to buy you know, different Blu-rays or DVDs from different countries, and some of them don't have English subtitles on, so it's frustrating. So I went for this one, and Dark Planet, and it is good, but it's, again, it's that classic thing. Some of it looks absurd and like a typical SF film. Some of it looks like bits of The Fifth Element, and I really can't stand The Fifth Element. Oh, it just really, really doesn't do it for me at all. And other parts of it look fine, you know. But this is the problem with the visual aspect of that stuff. You get a lot of absurdity in there. But I enjoyed this. It's from the guy who directed Stalingrad and The Ninth Company, 115 minutes. And, you know, this is a 15, strong violence, torture and bloody injury. Good grief. But yeah, you know, it's worth a look. And it does reflect some of the complexity. But what's interesting is the guy who plays Maxim, he's got this curly blonde hair. You know, he's this sort of beautiful sort of John Carter, Tarzan type figure. And you look at him and you think, oh God, really? What would the Strugatskys think of that? But they approved the casting. The casting was approved. And they wanted somebody who looked like a mutant Superman, who looked like a superhero, because to reflect their vision of, you know, the fact where people on the earth in the future in this socialist paradise are, you know, they're sort of highly evolved. So that's a really interesting one. So watch out for Dark Planet. You can possibly stream it, I'm not sure, but do the research yourself, look at the different versions. I need to redo that because I bought this quite a few years ago, and see if there's a more complete version out there. So as you see it, there is some Strugatsky action to be had in the cinema beyond Stalker, beyond Hard to Be a God, and there's more to come. Monday begins on Saturday. It's been available for some years now as a masterwork. I do like that cover, and it's got a real sort of stentorian Soviet thing to the hammer and the sickle there. And this is rather, I mean, some people say it's like Terry Pratchett or Harry Potter. There's a great introduction here by Adam Roberts, and I'll just read what it says in the back. When young programmer Alexander Ivanovich Privalov picks up two hitchhikers while driving in Karelia, he is drawn into the mysterious world of the National Institute for the Technology of Witchcraft and Thaumaturgy, where research into magic is serious business, and where science, sorcery and socialism meet. Can chaos be far behind? Of course it can't. It's quite knockabout, episodic. If you like Sheckley, you'd probably like this. If you like Pratchett, you know, the average Pratchett fan's going to be baffled by it. It does remind me of Bulgakov, those sort of things, as I say. And they've written other books like this. Definitely Maybe is another one that's a bit like this as well, because they do occasionally have elements of sort of absurdist crime plots. They're sort of more crime type books, remind me a lot of Scandinavian crime, early Scandinavian crime by people like Schwal and Walu, the Martin Beck books, The Story of a Crime. So there's that sort of element there as well. And it is fun. I need to reread it because I don't think I gave it enough attention the first time around. So there is a film of this, which I don't have, which apparently is a musical. I have seen it on the internet to buy, but I've kind of stood away from it by now, but we'll see, I guess. Maybe I'll dip my toe in that water. So it is interesting, but of course there's comparisons to Randall Garrett, Too Many Magicians, the Lord Darcy books. If you've not read the Lord Darcy books, there's a wonderful complete Gollancz masterwork, which looks like this. And the beauty of Randall Garrett's Lord Darcy books is that they're really hard to categorise because they're alternate history, they are SF, but at the same time they have magic in them. So it's that whole thing about science fantasy. You know, is magic a science? You know, once there's a system you can describe it, what have you. Well, to me, once it stops being magic and it starts being a system and you can codify it and use it as a science, it's not magic anymore. It's not supernatural. It's natural. So it's science. Haha, that's my get out clause. But we'll come back to that again. We'll do a video just about that. So this is very knockabout and very much in that mode. So that's fun. And what else do we have? Now, the big surprise for most Strugatsky fans, this is the one I pull out that nobody knows about, and this is Lame Fate and Ugly Swans. And this is a Chicago Review Press trade paperback, as you see. Now, you're not going to see this in many bookshops. I got mine from Amazon, and it's I don't really like trade paperbacks, it's quite handsome, but to get hold of a Strugatsky that I never heard of before was really quite something. And it's very, very clever. And really, why does it have two titles? Well, I'll tell you why. Lame Fate and Ugly Swans are different books, but they're the same book. Lame Fate is the frame narrative. It's about a writer, Felix Sorokin. Now, interestingly, one of my other favourite Russian SF and fabula writers is also called Sorokin. So let me just show you a book by him. We're going to digress. That's The Blizzard, by Sorokin, which is in Penguin Modern Classics. You can get it, it's out there now. You can also get his Ice trilogy from NYRB, which looks like this. I'm not going to tell you about Sorokin and the Nest frame narrative, Lame Fate, and nested in that is Ugly Swans. So Ugly Swans is a book by Sorokin. So you've got this book about Sorokin called Lame Fate, and once you get reading inside, nested is Ugly Swans, which is a science fiction novel. So it's rather like The Iron Dream by Norman Spinrad. You pick up The Iron Dream, a few pages in, it becomes a science fiction novel by Adolf Hitler. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll come back to that again. I think I mentioned that in my top 5 alternate histories. In fact, I'm sure I did. But if not, we look at it again in some depth because it's great fun. So basically, Ugly Swans was originally published as a singleton on its own, as a novel in itself, but it's actually just it's inside Lame Fate. So it's a really clever, experimental, simple, and yet very effective thing. The main narrative of Ugly Swans, the novel by Sorokin, the protagonist of Lame Fate, is about a literary figure going back to his hometown and finding that it's haunted by some people who are called clammies. They wear black masks and, you know, they're sort of outcasts and they've got strange sort of mutant powers and what have you. I'm not going to tell you any more than that because you really should try and dig this out and get hold of it while it's available. And I say this is one of the few things that is quite hard to find in the Rover that's out there. So well worth looking for if you're a Strugatsky fan and you've got everything else. And there is a film of Ugly Swans as well. And this is it. This is from 2007. The Ugly Swans. It's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It's really good. And this gets the balance right between the sort of hardcore, tough vision of somebody like David Cronenberg and the more sort of soft, romantic, meditative feel of, say, Tarkovsky. So this is probably actually my favourite Strugatsky Brothers film. This gets the balance right between the entertainment and the storytelling, and it's relatively concise, and the art side, and it's really, really good. And there's lots of affinities with elements of Roadside Picnic. There's affinities with Hard to Be a God. So, you know, you're getting the sort of classic Strugatsky themes, and it wasn't too expensive. So do try and pick it up and watch it. It's really, really good. I'm sure if you can stream it. I've not researched it. I got this 2 or 3 years ago. So that's one to watch out for. So there's the real sort of surprise in the bunch. Ugly Swans, Lame Fate. So if you're a Strugatsky fan, you haven't come across these, you love these. So get out there and get them. I think that's about it for my overview of what's around and what's out there at the moment. As I say, there are some other things. I'll have flashed them up on the screen during the video. So if you're new to the Strugatsky Brothers, go with Roadside Picnic or Hard to Be a God. As I say, I favour Hard to Be a God, and I'm just going to show you the cover once more. If you're looking for this edition, it is expensive, as I say, and it is lovely though. But of course, the Galaxy Masterwork's got a good jacket as well, so, you know, well worth getting. But a great book. And as I say, to recap, read it, compare it to Left Hand of Darkness, and do watch both film versions, and you'll find it all very rewarding. So there's a bit more science fiction studies for you to get yourselves into. There will be a test, as they say. This is Outlaw Bookseller, hoping you're surviving the Jubilee. If you're not, try and read Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore, the classic alternate history book about the South winning the Civil War. I always think it's a bit of a cheat because there's a time machine in it. I don't really like alternate histories with a time machine in it, but that does seem to be a thing in the sort of South wins things. You know, Harry Turtledove did that in Guns of the South, didn't he? So anyway, enough waffling on. I'll let you get on with what you're getting on with, and I'll see you again soon. Aside from Sorokin, if you're missing out on your Russian SF, this is Sputnik. This came out a few years ago, great film. I did have a Russian DVD originally, which I sold on at a different cover. And this is great, it gets compared to Alien a lot. And I streamed it as soon as it appeared on something. I think it appeared on Netflix, and I went out and got the DVD straight away. This is a Blu-ray, just come out since, and I don't normally like these sort of slipcase things, but as it's a different design, I decided to keep it, and this is cracking. People do compare it to Alien, as I say. It's actually more like the Quatermass Experiment. It's really good. Again, excellent mixture of traditional SF storytelling and more thoughtful stuff. Very, very good indeed. And the lady who's in it, I think she's in the new James Bond film, which I found I couldn't sit through. But yes, if you want a bit of hardcore Russian skiffy, there you go, Sputnik, which means fellow traveller, of course.